Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
G'day, Starlo here. I'm on the road on my way home from Nagambie in northwestern Victoria up on the Goulburn River. I was down there for a national Carp Summit that I was invited to. A group of people from all over the country, but particularly the Murray-Darling Basin, coming together to discuss the carp issue and the best way to proceed with dealing with invasive carp in our waterways. I must admit, when I first got the invitation, quite a few months ago now, I thought, here we go, yet another talk fest, talking about carp and not really doing anything about them. But I've actually come away from this summit really impressed by the energy that was in the room. There were over 80 participants and they were all very much singing from the same songbook, and I think it actually might result in some changes in the way that we look at carp. My personal history with carp, I did a presentation at the summit and I included in it a photo of the very first carp that I ever caught, and I caught a couple of them, and it was in the Murrumbidgee River below Burrinjuck Dam in New South Wales, and that was in either 1974 or 75, I'm not exactly sure which, but either way, it's over 50 years ago. Carp have been in Australia, of course, since the mid-1800s, but it wasn't until what's known as the Ballara strain of carp escaped or were liberated from an aquaculture facility in Gippsland that the carp plague, for want of a better word, really got started. That was in the late 1960s, and by the 70s, carp was spreading like wildfire through the whole Murray-Darling system and well beyond. They've extended well beyond these days. When I caught those first carp down in the Murrumbidgee River, I thought, wow, this is interesting, a new species that I've never caught before. I'll tick that one off the list. But I already knew enough to know that they were a pest, and I killed those ones and disposed of them, as I've done with every carp that I've caught since then. And I have lost count of how many carp I've caught in the subsequent 50 years. It must be in the thousands, and I've killed every single one of them, and you know what? I've made absolutely no impact on carp numbers. Later I went on to train to be an English and history high school teacher, and my first posting was to Bourke in northwestern New South Wales out on the Darling River. I arrived there at the end of 1979, and I was really looking forward to chasing cod and yellowbelly and all the other terrific fish up in the Darling River. But unfortunately, I arrived just a couple of years after the first wave of the carp plague had reached Bourke. And by 1980, the year that I spent there, about all we caught was carp. We caught about 50 carp for every native fish that I caught during the time I was there. They were so thick you could just about walk across the backs of the carp down at the North Bourke Weir. As is often the case with the first wave of an invasive species, the carp numbers were really, really high in that initial surge as they went up the Darling River. And it was about all I caught while I was there. And I've enjoyed targeting carp, especially on fly and on lures, and especially when I can sight fish to them. They're a pretty hard fighting fish. Viewed objectively, they're not a bad sort of fish. They're just the wrong fish in our part of the world, just as rabbits and foxes are the wrong mammals in our part of the world. So every carp that I catch is a dead carp. I kill and dispose of all of them. But like I said before, it doesn't matter if me and the other 4 or 5 million anglers in Australia all kill a couple of hundred carp a year. We're really not going to have a huge impact on their numbers the way they breed up, especially every time there's a flood event. And the big floods of 21, 22, the breeding that took place after that was just astronomical. And those carp are all in our system now coming through. The estimates that came out of the summit as to how many carp are out there in our waterways right now are scary. Conservative estimates of 350 to 375 million carp in our waterways. That is just a vast number. And in some parts of the Murray-Darling system, they comprise 90% of the biomass of life that's living in those rivers. Our native fish have been dramatically reduced as a result. Direct competition with the carp eating their eggs and fry, spreading diseases and parasites, and perhaps most importantly of all, the bioengineering that carp do. The way they feed, sucking up the mud and spewing it out into mid-water and sifting through it for various invertebrates that they mostly eat, that has dramatically changed our inland waterways. And I've seen it in my lifetime. I've seen rivers that were once relatively clear and had a beautiful green tinge to them change to muddy brown drains with very little natural aquatic vegetation left in them, dramatically reduced numbers of small fish and insect larvae and all the stuff that supports the food chain. Carp have had a dramatic impact. Don't believe these people that say that carp are only a symptom of our degraded waterways. They certainly are that, but they're also a major cause of degradation in our waterways. We'd be so much better off without them. But I'm enough of a realist to accept the fact that we're never going to get rid of carp. I think they're here to stay now, unfortunately. And we've sort of got to learn to live with them. But when I say that, it doesn't mean that we have to accept them. We don't learn to live with rabbits or foxes or cane toads or prickly pear or blackberries. We do our best to try and control them and keep their numbers down. And it was absolutely fascinating. We had a dinner cruise on the Goulburn River on Ngambie the evening before the summit, and the keynote speaker on board that dinner cruise was a wonderful guy by the name of Brian Cook. Now, Brian was involved in all the stages of rabbit control right from the middle of the 20th century through until quite recent times, myxomatosis and then later calicivirus. And hearing him talk about rabbit control methods was just absolutely fascinating. If we just let rabbits run rampant as they were in the 20s and 30s, by the 40s and 50s, our agriculture industry would have virtually collapsed, and a lot more of our little native marsupials would have become extinct. But by attempting to deal with the rabbits and implementing various control methods like myxomatosis and then later calicivirus, we were able to keep their numbers down and also use other control methods like poisoning and ripping up their warrens and shooting and so forth. And we were able to keep them in some sort of check and maintain our agricultural industries and save quite a few of those little marsupials that would have been driven to extinction otherwise. So we did something about it and it worked. But the calicivirus thing is really interesting. It was known that calici would have a big impact on rabbits, but there was also a lot of fear that it could jump from one species to another or whatever. So a lot of research had to be done, and it always should be. Whenever we introduce a biological control, we need to be absolutely certain that we know about the side effects, because we've seen some fairly disastrous mistakes made in the past with things like cane toads and gambusia or mosquito fish in our freshwater environment. So we don't want to repeat those mistakes. So they isolated calicivirus on an island in South Australia that had rabbits on it, and they were studying the impact on the rabbits there to decide whether they were going to be able to release the virus more widely. Well, it got out. Now, the story is that blowflies feeding on the dead rabbits on the island then travelled across to the mainland and kick-started calici on the mainland, and it took off from there. And it had a big impact on rabbit populations. It's been really helpful in pushing rabbit numbers down, but it would have been so much more effective if it had had a controlled release rather than a accidental, in inverted commas, release from that island. If it had been able to be introduced at the right time of year in the right places, it would have impacted rabbit numbers a lot more than it did. But it's still impacting rabbit numbers, and it's helping us to keep them in check, along with myxomatosis and poisoning and ripping nose warrens and all the other things that we do to keep the rabbits under control. Now, a lot of you will have heard of the carp herpes virus that a lot of scientists would like to see introduced into Australia to help control carp numbers. And I know there's mixed feelings about it out there. There's people that are really opposed to the idea and others who strongly support it. I was on the fence to begin with, but I did a lot of my own homework and spoke to a lot of well-informed people, including scientists and biologists, and I've become a firm believer in the fact that we do need to use the virus. But again, I'm also enough of a realist to know that the politicians are absolutely scared of the idea of using a biocontrol like a virus, especially in the years since COVID, when the whole word virus has got so many connotations and hang-ups about it. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately, because look, despite some of the propaganda and misinformation you might have heard to the contrary, it does not jump to other species. It's been tested, it's been directly injected into native fish in controlled situations, and they do not catch it. Some of them can carry it, interestingly. They can actually carry it and transfer it to carp, but it has no impact on those native species whatsoever. There's been a lot of talk about the difficulty dealing with the cleanup after the liberation of the virus, when and if it finally happens. You know, there'll be a lot of dead carp around. Well, there will, but I think we saw from the big fish kills out at Menindee and everything a few years ago that massive fish kills like that are caused by poor water quality. They don't necessarily lead to dramatically degraded long-term water quality themselves. We can deal with fish kills. In a flowing system, it's really not a huge problem because they move along. In some of the closed systems and the billabongs and lagoons off the main rivers, could be more of an issue. We might actually have to have clean-up crews go out and collect the dead carp, but that'd be reasonably easy to arrange. It occurs on every continent on Earth except Australia and Antarctica. It's in so many other countries that have carp. It'll get here eventually, I'm pretty sure, but a bit like Khaleesi, if it gets here under its own steam or there's no control over how it's released, it won't be as effective as if it was used as an actual tool. As much of a fan as I am of getting the virus out there and using it as a tool in controlling carp numbers, I know that it's not going to be the silver bullet. We're never going to get rid of the carp. It might kill as few as 20 or 30% of the carp in its first wave. It could kill as many as 40 to 60%. If it did, that would be really, really useful, because if we get their numbers down that much, we can use other controls to try and keep them down. But it's never going to kill all the carp. Say it kills somewhere between 20% and 60 or 70% in its first wave. A lot of carp will survive, and they'll tend to have a bit more of a resistance to that virus in future. So over time, it'll lose its efficiency. We need to take advantage of that first wave when we've got the numbers down and actually do something in terms of other forms of control of the carp as well. But anyway, like I said, I'm probably dreaming, because I don't think it's going to get the go-ahead. Interestingly, talking to Brian, I don't think Khaleesi would have got the go-ahead, even though it was proven to be safe, it was proven to be restricted to rabbits and it couldn't jump species or whatever else. There's just so much natural caution amongst politicians and decision makers that I don't think it would have got the go-ahead. But it got out. Whether it was blowflies or it got some other form of help, I don't know, but it did get off that island and it got out, and it's really helped us to keep rabbit numbers down. Let's hope the same thing doesn't have to happen with the carp virus, where it gets a bit of assistance from either a blowfly or a two-legged blowfly to get out there. But look, it will get into Australia. It's as close as Indonesia now. So it only takes one infected fish or part of a fish of a carp to be imported into the country from somewhere like Indonesia, or brought across on a boat or whatever else. I mean, biosecurity is great, but it's been proven to be fairly porous. It'll get here. It'd be far better if we had some control over when, where and how it gets here. But anyway, look, it's an argument that will continue for many more years. I very much doubt that the virus will be introduced during my lifetime. which is a real shame. I think it could have been an immensely useful tool in our carp control measures. But we can still do stuff even without the virus. There's a lot of other stuff that we can do. And we had some wonderful speakers at the summit, and Ivor Stewart particularly was one of the most impressive. He talked about the different densities of carp in different areas, particularly of the Murray-Darling system, and how once they get over a certain level they become just so destructive. And Ivor's whole thrust was that we need to be just moving everything back from there. So we need to look at the areas where the most destructive densities occur and work hard on them to drag them back down to a lower level. We need to look at the ones where they're not so bad so far, the carp densities, and try and stop them from increasing dramatically. And most importantly, we need to look at areas that don't have carp yet and make absolutely sure that carp don't get in there, or do our very best to ensure that they don't get in there. I've seen them spread to so many new systems in my lifetime, particularly coastal rivers in New South Wales and even southeast Queensland where they didn't occur before. And we need to make sure that doesn't keep happening. We can't just shrug and say, well, they're going to get in there eventually anyway. If we work at it, we can stop them from getting into some of those areas where they don't exist already. And stopping them and controlling them and doing our best to reduce their numbers is what the thrust of the summit was all about. And you're going to be hearing a lot more about it, I'm sure, in coming weeks and months. When you do hear about it, please engage with it and do your own research. Get online, go to some of the links that we'll share. I'll share some with this video and podcast. Take the time to go and study those links, learn a bit more about the damage that carp do to our environment and about the things that we can all do in terms of even just lobbying our politicians and our decision makers about taking constructive action to try and control and reduce carp numbers, because it's going to make a massive difference to the future of our inland and coastal fisheries, coastal river fisheries, if we can drive those carp numbers down and keep them under some sort of control across the next couple of decades. It's all well and good breeding up native fish in hatcheries and liberating them into rivers, and I'm a big supporter of that in the right places and when it's done properly. But it's a little bit pointless if those areas are so heavily degraded by carp that those introduced native fish just don't do well in them. So we need to do something, and hopefully a lot more will be done after this Carp Summit. I'll keep you up to speed with it. Until next time, this is Starlo wishing you tight lines.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.